Imagine being publicly humiliated by the people you least expect, people who believe they have all the power. Now imagine turning that moment of shame into their biggest downfall. What if, in a split second, the tables were turned? What if the very people who mocked you found themselves begging for your help, only to realize they've lost everything because of their arrogance? This is the story of how one woman, disrespected by a billionaire family, used their cruelty as a stepping stone, turning it all around and teaching them a lesson they'll never forget. The gala was everything you'd expect from an exclusive event: elegant, sophisticated, and full of the world's wealthiest individuals. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the polished marble floors. The sound of clinking glasses and quiet conversations filled the air, as business moguls and socialites mingled with the ease of those who lived in the world of endless opportunity. The Walkers were at the center of it all, their presence commanding attention as always. They were the picture of power and privilege. Arthur Walker, the patriarch, walked with a quiet confidence, his suit tailored to perfection, his every word calculated. His family stood beside him, equally poised and untouchable. But as the night wore on, their focus shifted. Arthur's eyes fell on a woman who had entered the room quietly, unnoticed by most. She was striking, but not in the way the other guests were. Her dress was simple, elegant, but not flashy. She stood apart from the crowd, observing, not vying for attention. To the Walkers, she was nothing more than another face in the crowd, another guest at their party. They didn't know her, they didn't recognize her, and in that moment, they didn't care to. To them, she was insignificant. As Arthur scanned the room, his gaze landed on her. The moment stretched on full, shouted only a second, but he already made his judgment. He leaned towards his wife and whispered loud enough for a few of their close circle to hear. "Look at that one," he said with a sneer, nodding in her direction. "She's probably just here hoping some of our success rubs off on her." The others chuckled, his words landing like an easy punchline. The laughter was laced with disdain, as if they'd just won some small victory over her. The woman stood a few yards away, unaware of the quiet conversation about her. She wasn't used to being the subject of mockery, but it wasn't the first time. It wasn't the first time someone had looked at her and assumed she didn't belong. She'd dealt with this her entire life. The sideways glances, the dismissive stares. But what hurt more than the words was the fact that it came from people who had no idea who she was. They saw a woman in a simple dress, someone who didn't fit their idea of elite, and assumed she was just like the countless others who would smile and nod, too afraid to speak up. But not her. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. She was stronger than that. Her mind worked quickly, piecing together the situation. She had heard them clearly, but instead of reacting with anger or frustration, she chose to rise above it. She excused herself from the group she was standing with, taking a slow, deliberate step away from the spotlight. Her movements were graceful, measured. No one noticed her leave the conversation. No one noticed the shift. The Walkers were too busy basking in their own inflated sense of superiority to notice that they had just made a mistake, one that would cost them dearly. As she walked away, her heart beat steadily in her chest, the sting of their mockery still fresh. But she knew something they didn't. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It was just beginning. The insult they had casually thrown her way would soon be their undoing, and she would be the one to bring them down. She wasn't going to stand up to them immediately. She wasn't going to let her emotions dictate her next move. No, she would take the high road for now. But when the time came, when it mattered most, she would make them regret every word, every glance, every sneer they had thrown her way. She would make them realize who they had disrespected, and she would do it in a way they would never forget. The night carried on like any other, with the Walkers still basking in their own world of wealth and status, unaware that they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. The woman, meanwhile, took her leave from the gala without fanfare. She didn't make a scene, didn't shout, or make any demands. She simply walked away, knowing full well that this would not be the end of it. She didn't have to react immediately. Instead, she let the moment pass, knowing it would come back to haunt them in the most unexpected way. As the days passed, the Walkers moved on, convinced that they had done nothing more than push some buttons at a party. They didn't understand the gravity of their actions. They didn't realize how much they had underestimated the woman they had mocked. Arthur Walker was in his office, preparing for the next big move, a multi-billion-dollar deal with Veritex Solutions, a company they had been trying to land for months. He had no idea that the woman he had disrespected the other night was the CEO of the very company he had been courting. To him, this was just another business meeting, a deal to close, a partnership to solidify. Everything was in place. The proposal was perfect, the numbers checked out. All he had to do was show up and sign. He didn't give the woman at the gala a second thought. To him, she was just another face in the crowd, just another person who had no idea what it meant to be on the other side of power. The day of the meeting arrived. The Walkers, confident and ready to seal the deal, walked into the sleek office building of Veritex Solutions. They were met by the receptionist, who led them down a quiet hallway into a conference room. The tension in the air felt different, subtle but noticeable. It wasn't the normal atmosphere they were used to. Arthur felt it, but he dismissed it. Focus, he told himself. This is business. This is what we do best. The door opened, and there she was, the woman from the gala. But now, she wasn't just some random guest. They weren't the powerful ones anymore. She was the one in control. She was the CEO of Veritex Solutions. She wasn't some woman they could mock or look down on. She was the one they had underestimated. Arthur froze for a moment. He blinked, his mind racing. He recognized her immediately, though it took him a second to fully process what this meant. How could he have been so blind? She stood behind the desk, calm and collected, a slight but firm smile on her face. She didn't seem angry, but there was a quiet strength in her presence. The Walkers had no idea what was about to happen. They had walked into this meeting expecting a handshake and a deal, but they were about to walk out with nothing. Arthur sat down, trying to regain his composure. The other members of his team were already looking uneasy. They could sense the shift in the room. They could feel the weight of the situation, but they weren't yet sure why. "I'm glad you could make it," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Please, take a seat." Arthur and his team sat, their confidence fading with each passing second. They exchanged uncomfortable glances, trying to read the situation, but the woman remained calm. There was no rush in her movements, no signs of impatience. She was composed, and it made the Walkers feel small. The power dynamic had shifted without them even realizing it. "I've read your proposal," she began, breaking the silence, "but I don't think it's going to work." Arthur's mind raced. What? His heart skipped a beat. This was not the meeting he had prepared for. He had expected questions, sure, but not this, not rejection. They had been working on this deal for months. He cleared his throat, trying to control his shock. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "This deal is off," she said simply, her tone firm yet measured. Arthur's mind spun. He couldn't understand. "But we've been negotiating for months. You've reviewed everything. This deal is exactly what you asked for. You're making a mistake." She didn't flinch. "No, Mr. Walker, I'm not making a mistake. You are. You've been disrespectful, dismissive, and now you expect me to ignore that and just sign a deal because it benefits you." The weight of her words hit him hard. His face flushed with embarrassment, his arrogance crumbling. The confidence he had carried into the room was fading quickly, replaced by the stark reality that everything he had worked for could slip away in an instant. "I don't think you understand," Arthur started again, his voice faltering. "This deal isn't just important to us, it's important for both of us. We can both win big." But she didn't seem moved. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Arthur saw something he hadn't expected. It wasn't anger, it wasn't spite, it was a quiet, almost indifferent power. She wasn't trying to hurt him, she was simply stating a fact. The deal was off, and there was nothing he could do about it. "I've made my decision," she said, her voice final. The Walkers were stunned. This was supposed to be their moment, another win, another deal in their favor. But now, they were left grasping for something that had already slipped through their fingers. As they sat in silence, realizing the enormity of what had just happened, she added one final line that would haunt them for a long time. "You've just cost yourselves billions," she said, her words cutting through the tension. "And for what? A few moments of pride and arrogance?" Arthur's chest tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. The meeting ended, and the Walkers left the room, their heads heavy with the weight of their loss. Their arrogance had cost them far more than a business deal. It had cost them their reputation and their chance at a future. They had no idea how to fix this. But what they didn't realize, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that this moment, their downfall, was only the beginning. And while they were losing everything, the woman who had been humiliated by them was quietly rising to the top. The Walkers left the meeting in stunned silence. Arthur's usual confident stride was now a heavy, defeated walk. His mind raced, replaying everything in that conference room. How could this happen? His thoughts were scattered, but one thing was clear. They had just lost everything. This wasn't just a deal. It wasn't just about the millions they would lose today. This was the deal that would set them up for years to come. Global expansion, lucrative contracts, partnerships with some of the world's largest corporations. This was their ticket to cementing their place at the top, to becoming untouchable. And now it was gone. Gone because of a few minutes of arrogance, because of words spoken in the heat of the moment. Words that should have never been said. Arthur couldn't focus. He paced back and forth in his office, his phone buzzing with missed calls. He glanced at the screen, seeing nothing but Veritech flashing back at him. He knew it was futile. They were done. He finally picked up the phone, his fingers shaking slightly as he dialed the number to the CEO's office. But when the woman answered, her tone was calm, too calm. "Arthur," she said, "I hope you're taking time to reflect on what happened. I'm sorry it had to be this way, but this was never about the deal. This was about something more." The immediate consequences of their loss spread quickly. News outlets, once eager to talk about the Walkers' latest achievements, now couldn't stop talking about their downfall. Social media erupted with viral posts discussing the Walkers' arrogance, their disrespect, and the woman who had taken everything from them. As the hours ticked by, the media storm grew. Headlines screamed, and their empire, so meticulously built, began to crumble. Billionaire families' public racism costs them a multi-billion-dollar deal. The words hit like a wrecking ball. The Walkers had worked so hard to be untouchable, to stand above everyone else. But now, they were the ones on the receiving end of the ridicule. Their mockery of a woman they saw as beneath them had cost them their reputation, their deal, and potentially their future. The fallout was fast and merciless. Arthur Walker found himself on the defensive in interviews, trying to explain away what had happened. But the damage was done. The media wasn't interested in his excuses. They were interested in the story of how a powerful billionaire family had thought they could get away with racism and disrespect, and how it came back to haunt them. But the woman, the CEO of Veritex Solutions, wasn't focused on the media frenzy. She wasn't seeking revenge or airing her grievances. Instead, she quietly went about her business, knowing that her decision had far greater implications than anyone realized. As the Walkers scrambled to put out the fire they had started, the woman's rise began. Her decision to walk away from the deal wasn't just about the Walkers. It was a statement, a moment of empowerment that resonated far beyond that one interaction. People who had been silent for years, who had been overlooked or dismissed because of their race, gender, or status, saw her stand up and take control. They saw someone who had faced the same kinds of insults, the same dismissive attitudes, but had used them as fuel to rise above it all. Her impact went beyond business. She wasn't just taking back a deal. She was taking back control of a system that had long treated people like her as lesser. The Walkers were losing everything. Their empire was unraveling, and they were struggling to keep up appearances, to hold on to whatever remained of their public image. But as they faltered, she grew stronger. The business world was watching, and the woman, the CEO, was becoming a beacon of hope. Her story quickly became a symbol of resilience. She wasn't just the CEO of Veritex Solutions. She was a role model, someone who had been silenced, dismissed, and underestimated, but who had used that disrespect to fuel her rise to the top. As she continued to secure new partnerships as her company grew stronger, her story inspired others, especially those who had felt overlooked for far too long. The Walkers had taken her for granted, assumed they could humiliate her and get away with it. But in doing so, they had opened the door for a shift, one that they had no control over. While the Walkers' reputation was being shredded in the media, the woman was quietly building a new legacy, one based on respect, empowerment, and strength. She wasn't trying to prove a point. She was simply living her truth. But the message was loud and clear. You cannot disrespect people and expect to get away with it. There are consequences. And in the end, the Walkers learned this lesson the hard way. As the Walkers looked at the destruction of their empire, they had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. The woman they had humiliated had turned their world upside down, and there was nothing they could do to undo the damage. All because of a few moments of pride, a few careless words. And now, as they watched her rise, they had no one but themselves to blame. In the end, the woman didn't need to say anything more. She had made her decision clear, and the world was watching. The Walkers had been humbled by the one person they had underestimated the most. As the Walkers' world continued to spiral out of control, They realized just how far-reaching the consequences of their actions were. Their empire, once solid and unshakable, was now fractured. It wasn't just the loss of a deal, it was the loss of trust, respect, and influence. Their reputation had been permanently damaged by their own arrogance. Arthur Walker found himself sitting in his office late one night, his face buried in his hands. The bright lights of the city outside his window felt distant, as if a world away. For the first time in years, he didn't feel in control. The business meetings he used to lead with ease now felt hollow, and every conversation seemed to remind him of the very thing he had tried to dismiss. The public backlash didn't stop. News outlets continued to report on the Walkers' fall from grace, and social media was full of commentary. People from all walks of life were calling out their hypocrisy, their disrespect, and their inability to understand the consequences of their actions. Billionaire families' public racism costs them a multi-billion-dollar deal was just the beginning. It wasn't long before the media started to dig deeper. Reports came out about past questionable business practices, other moments of arrogance, and the attitude they had taken towards people who didn't have the wealth or power they had. The Walkers were no longer just a family with money. They were a symbol of the very thing people had grown tired of: entitlement. The woman, the CEO, was watching all of this unfold. But she wasn't watching from the sidelines with glee or a sense of revenge. She was watching because, for once, she could breathe. For once, she could see that the system, the very system that had continuously put people like her at a disadvantage, was shifting. Slowly, but surely. She had made her decision days ago, but it was never about vengeance. It was about setting a new precedent. Her decision to walk away from the Walkers wasn't just a business move, it was personal. It was a statement. And in a way, the Walkers had given her the platform she needed. By humiliating her in front of everyone, they had created the conditions for her to take control, not just of the deal, but of her narrative. She wasn't interested in boasting. She wasn't interested in proving a point for the sake of being right. She was simply doing what needed to be done, standing up for herself, and in doing so, standing up for others who had been silenced. The aftermath of the Walkers' public shaming was a wake-up call for many. Businesses in the industry began to rethink how they treated others. Deals once seen as impossible became more open, more inclusive. The power structures that had allowed the Walkers to behave with impunity started to shift. And in this new reality, the woman, our heroine, was emerging as a symbol of what could happen when people refused to be silenced. Her story quickly spread across the business world. She became a role model for other entrepreneurs, especially for women and people of color, showing them that they didn't have to conform to the power dynamics that had once held them back. She wasn't just the CEO of Veritex Solutions anymore. She was a movement. Meanwhile, the Walkers, realizing too late what they had done, tried to pick up the pieces. They scrambled to repair their tarnished image, but it was a losing battle. The media had moved on, their reputation shattered, and potential partners now viewed them with distrust. The damage they had caused by their own careless words was irreversible. Arthur sat across from his advisors, trying to figure out how to fix this mess, but the answers weren't coming. The deals they had once signed with ease now felt like distant memories. The respect they once commanded was gone. In a final meeting with his team, Arthur's voice cracked as he spoke. "We've lost everything. And for what? A few careless words? We underestimated her, and now look where we are." He looked at the faces around him, his family, his colleagues, each one of them struggling to hide their own sense of defeat. The truth was evident, and there was no escaping it. They had built their empire on arrogance, but it had taken a single, well-timed act of courage to bring it all crashing down. Back at Veritex Solutions, the woman sat in her office, looking out over the city. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't gloating. Instead, she reflected on the quiet strength that had gotten her to this point. She had seen injustice, had felt the sting of disrespect, but she had never let it break her. Now, she stood at the forefront of a movement, not because she wanted the spotlight, but because she had created the change needed to make the world more equitable. The story had come full circle. The Walkers had lost everything, not because of business strategy or failure, but because of their treatment of others. The woman, on the other hand, had gained everything: respect, influence, and the power to shift the narrative. In the end, it wasn't about the money, the deals, or the power. It was about standing up for yourself, even when the world tells you to stay quiet. And that's a lesson the Walkers would never forget. This story is a reminder that how we treat others matters. Arrogance, disrespect, and underestimating others only lead to downfall. But courage, integrity, and standing up for yourself can turn the tables in ways you never expected. If you believe in the power of standing up for what's right, hit like and subscribe for more stories of real-life inspiration, empowerment, and lessons that challenge the status quo. Have you ever been underestimated or disrespected? How did you handle it? I want to hear your stories. Drop a comment below and share your experiences. Let's start a conversation. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear this powerful message